On a crisp October morning, the silence above Evermere Lake was broken by a diver's chilling scream. Through a veil of autumn mist, his desperate cry carried far into the dense woodlands. When he emerged, his face pale and eyes wide with terror, the rescue team knew something was horribly wrong. Beneath the tangled roots and algae at the lake's shadowy bottom, the diver had found two teenagers, lying side by side, as if in peaceful slumber. But what sent icy dread down his spine were their eyes, sewn shut with rough, dark twine. 4 months before, in early June, 17-year-old Jamie Taylor and 16-year-old Sophia Adams disappeared during what began as an ordinary trek along the tranquil trails of the English Lakes district. Nobody foresaw the horror lurking in these once familiar woods. Nobody imagined the killer had spent months in hiding, silently keeping watch over careless hikers and families flocking to Evermere's sparkling shores. This isn't just the story of a crime. It's the tale of how the scars of a shattered childhood grew into something monstrous, and how 2 lives were caught in the wake of someone else's madness. The morning of June 3, 2018 dawned warm and gentle, sunlight painting a golden sheen across fields and lakes, not far from the quaint market town of Greycoat. Jamie, tall and thin with a wild mop of auburn hair, and Sophia, petite, olive-skinned, known for her sparkling green eyes, could barely contain their excitement. Since meeting at Greycoat Academy 2 years earlier, after Jamie relocated from Sheffield with his mother, the pair were inseparable. It was Sophia's love of the outdoors and local lore that drew Jamie out of his shell, teaching him to recognize birdsong, spot wildflowers, and read the subtle messages left by foxes and deer along the trails. Over countless weekends, they'd hiked every path within a 20-kilometer radius of the town, always back before dusk, always checking in with anxious parents. They had earned trust by never breaking this rule. On that fateful day, their plan was simple: hike to the forgotten Farley Tower at the eastern tip of Evermere Lake, eat lunch by the ruins, and return before evening. Jamie packed his treasured vintage camera, a battered Leica given him by his late grandfather. Sophia filled her rucksack with a flask of ginger tea, homemade pasties, apples, and a faded map marked with her own notations about secret glades and panoramic views. They chained their bikes to the new park cycle rack, double-locked and shielded by the ever-watchful eye of the park ranger. The last person to see them was Ranger Bernard Fisher, patrolling before his shift ended at 9 a.m. He recalled their bright greetings, checked Jamie's mobile was fully charged, and called out reminders to mind their footing near the old, overgrown tower. Sophia's father, Thomas Adams, Greycoat's only pharmacist, expected a text from his daughter by 5:30 p.m., their custom after every expedition. But that day, as golden hour faded to a bruised twilight and his phone remained silent, Thomas's unease hardened into real fear. He called Jamie's mother, Rachel Taylor, just after 7 p.m. By then, dusk was giving way to the cool breath of night. Together, guided by weak torchlight and rising dread, they followed the main trail. The kids' bikes were untouched, locks unbroken. No muddy footprints, no broken branches, no panic or struggle. Their shouts were swallowed by the wind and the ancient, echoing boughs. Realizing they needed help and equipment, the parents phoned local police. Within the hour, a search team of 10 set out, flashlights strobing through the underbrush, radios crackling in the cold. All night, the woods rang only with the distant hooting of owls and the hope-crushing silence of missing children. The first light of day brought volunteers, hikers, shopkeepers, and even local school teachers combed every path, ravine, and bramble patch within 4 miles. Trained dogs sniffed at old squirrel dens and abandoned foxholes. Divers plumbed the shallow coves along the accessible shore, but much of the lake's weed-choked depths remained impenetrable. A police helicopter skimmed the treetops, but thick crowns hid what secrets the ancient woodland might keep. Meanwhile, both teens' phones went dark almost at once, cutting off all hope of tracing their final movements. Experts traced their last signals to a notorious dead zone halfway up the crumbling stone path toward Farley Tower. No clues, no witnesses, only the rising ache of the unknown. As the search stretched on, so did the nightmare. Word of Jamie and Sophia's disappearance spread throughout Greycoat and the surrounding countryside. Banners with their school portraits fluttered on every village notice board. Cafes, pubs, church halls, every gathering place in the region was united by an anxious, unspoken question. How could two responsible young people simply vanish in broad daylight? The official search was called off after 3 relentless weeks. Hopes dwindled, but never died. Sophia's mother, Elena, and Jamie's mother, Rachel, made their own patrols along muddy tracks each weekend, clutching battered torches and well-thumbed photos. Volunteers checked barns, sheds, even abandoned farmhouses, chasing rumors or following the faintest of leads. The unyielding woods, however, refused to give up their secrets. Autumn soon draped the land in her somber cloak. Leaves swirled in sullen wind, and Evermere's water grew dark and icy. Tourists thinned out, replaced only by the occasional fisherman or the devoted company of amateur ghost hunters who fancied the old tower haunted. The townsfolk hurried their children home before dusk, locking doors and hearts against the unknown. Then, on October 29th, Greycoat police received an anonymous phone call. The voice of man's, hoarse and trembling, insisted they search near the gnarled trees at the lake's northern inlet. When pressed for more information, the caller abruptly hung up. For the first time in months, hope fluttered in weary hearts. The next morning, divers swept the lake's misty surface. The area described was strewn with ancient tree trunks, half submerged, shrouded in rippling shadows. Visibility was poor. It wasn't until noon, in a pocket of silt beneath a tangle of roots, that one diver reached out and recoiled in silent terror. Within minutes, teams retrieved the lifeless bodies of 2 teenagers, both weighed down with creek stones, bound with thick fishing line, and laid side by side as if someone had arranged them with dreadful care. The ghastliest detail awaited investigators on the surface. Both Jamie's and Sophia's eyes had been sewn shut with crude, black thread-each stitch uneven, but done with deliberateness and purpose that chilled everyone present. Every family in Greycoat felt the loss. Jamie's camera and Sophia's backpack were nowhere to be found, but those details seemed insignificant in the shadow of the tragedy. The post-mortem revealed the cause of death: strangulation. Bruises dotted their necks, and faint scrapes showed prepared the stones, wound the bodies with fishing wire as if binding his secrets shut, and meticulously sewed shut their dead eyes before dragging them to the lake's shadowed depths. After months of living with his guilt, Brooks made the phone call that broke the case. He was found fit to stand trial, the judge seeing through his deadpan composure to the remorseless, calculating mind beneath. The rural jury needed barely an hour to return a unanimous verdict. Lionel Brooks would never walk the moorlands free again. Following the tragedy, a forest safety trust was established. Communication towers now gleam atop wooded ridges. Hiking trails boast new warning signs and emergency beacons. Sophia's and Jamie's families dedicate their lives to the cause, quietly tending memorial wildflowers planted beneath Farley Tower, ensuring that neither their children nor the lessons of Evermere's shadows will ever be forgotten. The aftermath of the trial left Greycoat forever changed. Though justice had officially been served, The wounds in the community ran deeper than any courtroom sentence could heal. In every classroom, cafe, and church pew, the story of Jamie and Sophia echoed like a warning lost among the pines. Parents clung to their children longer every morning. The laughter of youth on woodland trails gave way to cautious glances over shoulders. In those first weeks, local press spun endless stories of heroism and horror, of community resilience and brokenness. But as time passed, the villagers rarely spoke aloud of the murders. The silence around Evermere grew heavier, as if the lake itself demanded quiet respect for the secrets it had revealed. Rachel Taylor and Elena Adams refused to let grief consume them. Instead, they channeled their sorrow into action. Together with park officials and other bereaved families from across Cumbria, they launched the Lantern Path Foundation, a project devoted to making the region's vast wildlands safer for adventurers. By year's end, new emergency call points blinked atop mossy stone posts along the most popular trails, each marked with lantern symbols, recalling both hope and memory. Rangers received updated training, and volunteers patrolled during summer holidays, radioing regular updates to the visitors center. But the lake had changed. Autumn storms lashed the shoreline, bending trees with wind and rain. Fishermen whispered about odd splashes on foggy mornings, and solitary hikers sometimes claimed to feel the prickling sensation of being watched when near the water's edge, though no new threats emerged. One gloomy afternoon, as mists churned low along the banks, Sophia's father, Thomas, stood near Farley Tower with a small spade. He knelt and planted snowdrops at the foot of the ruined wall. Jamie's mother joined him, scattering bluebell seeds. It became a tradition that each spring, families and friends of the two teenagers would return to the spot with bulbs and wildflower seeds, turning the once-haunted glade into a vibrant memorial garden. Meanwhile, the details of Lionel Brooks's trial and confession were published in regional legal journals, and psychology students from Newcastle attended hearings to study the rare, chilling phenomenon Brooks had embodied. Years later, criminal profilers cited the case as an example of how childhood trauma, left untreated, can breed darkness, and how communities can heal, though never forget. Despite their sorrow, Rachel and Elena often spoke of the light Jamie and Sophia brought to the world. They became advocates for outdoor safety, touring other schools, speaking about vigilance and the importance of communication with loved ones. Sometimes, on dusk-lit evenings by the shore, school children would gather for lantern walks, each small flame a promise that Evermere's tragedy would serve as warning and remembrance, not just as a shadow over the past. In time, life in Greycoat moved forward, but every fresh blossom at Farley Tower, every warning sign gleaming in the light, and every cautious hiker along the lantern path served as silent witnesses to what was lost, and to the town's unbreakable resolve that such a story would never be repeated.